Today was the final of the freestyle event in South Africa. In fact, this was the final day of the tour, the 2025 tour overall. Magnus Carlsen had already won the Grand Prix. He'd already amassed enough points just by getting through to the semi-final, so he's the overall winner. However, there was still a lot at stake in this final. So Magnus Carlsen faced Lennart Aronian, and yeah, there's a lot of pride at stake. Lennart Aronian has long been a supporter of Fischer Random Chess, Chess 960, whatever you want to call it. And he's played very well this year. He won in Las Vegas. And there's also a matter of the prize money at stake. So first prize was $200,000. Second, $120,000, which isn't bad. But anyway, $200,000 went to the winner. It's a two-game match. Rapid play, 30 minutes on the clock for each player. And 15 seconds added each time they make a move. Let's see what happened. Game 1, Lennart Aronian playing white. Now let's have a look at the baseline. So we've got the rooks in the normal positions. We've got the bishops in the normal positions. But the knights particularly are slightly oddly placed because they could sort of tread on each other's toes there. Lennart opened with d4, putting a pawn in the middle and opening up the bishop. f5 from Carlsen, so that means the queen can get into the game quickly. f3, so in a way Lennart is doing the same, wants to get the queen active, but also perhaps he just wants to push forward with e4 and gain space in the centre. And Magnus thought for almost 10 minutes over his next move, which is quite a chunk of time when you only start with 30 minutes. And he played something incredibly aggressive here. He went for e5, which gambits a pawn. So that was taken very quickly by Aronian. Knight c6. And here's an interesting moment. Lennart simply brought the knight out. Now, if Carlsen could recapture on e5 in this position, then that would look pretty healthy. But watch what happens. Knight takes, queen e3, pin. So black has to play this, block with the queen. But then knight b5 is very embarrassing. How does black defend that pawn? I mean, the only way really is to play bishop d6. But after the exchange, again, queen takes, no, that's not on. f4 wins piece. So you've got to play pawn takes, and basically black is positionally bust here with those appalling pawns, and white has the two bishops. So instead of recapturing the pawn, knight e6 from Carlsen. Now, if white is too materialistic here, defends the pawn, then certainly black has compensation. Only decent way to defend that pawn is king d1, and then the king's going to be shot in the middle. Black will castle queenside and has a very nice initiative. But very quickly, Aronian played e4. He understands. You just need to develop here. You know, that in some ways, the normal rules of chess apply. If knight takes e5, pawn takes pawn, that's a clear pawn up for white. So pawn takes e4, knight e4. And again, the big question is, can black take on e5? Let's take a look. Knight e5. So why didn't Carlsen do this? I suspect he was concerned about f4, pushing the knight back, and then bishop c4. And this is a bit uncomfortable for black. Don't like the position of that knight. Obviously, there's a nasty pin at the moment. White has very easy development. There's potential to push with f5. Hard to bring this bishop into the game at the moment. So Carlsen played b6. Knight c3. Once again, I think taking here is very risky. I think White gets nice initiative. You know, that knight is kind of stuck. Doesn't want to go backwards. If it goes here, then I think Black's position is a real mess. I mean, you could, yeah, c5 is still on Preza. I think it's even better to castle. White has a fantastic initiative there. So that's why Carlsen just developed. But after f4, this is a clear pawn. You know, White is castling queenside very quickly. I mean, it's not just an extra pawn, but actually White dominates the centre. Carlsen played d5. I mean, he's looking to try to stir things up. Queen f2, the queen comes out, just defending this pawn. Bishop c4, very awkward. So nice pin. Castle's queenside, so the king is very safe. Remember, Aronian with White is still a pawn up. But Black's position is a real mess here. Carlsen played this. Rook d5 hits the queen. Rook takes. Remember, if pawn takes, then bishop takes knight. So after this, and basically Levon has a great position. He has the initiative, he has the two bishops, and he has an extra pawn. No complications. And, well, he steered the game to victory very calmly, very simply. Carlsen didn't stand a chance. So, game 1 to Aronian. Could Carlsen hit back? Now, so far in this tournament, that's been Carlsen's speciality. He has such a desire to win, and he's managed to bounce back. Could he do it again in the final? So this time, Carlsen playing White. Let's have a look at the baseline. So this one's a little, it's actually quite strange with the pieces as they are. Carlsen went for f4. Okay, supported by the rook. d5. So we have the sort of outlines of a reverse Dutch, basically. Brings this one into play. Yep, brings the bishop in the corner into play. All looks very logical. Carlsen breaks with e4. He's very fond of doing this. And that was taken. Knight f6 hits the bishop. I mean, already, because Carlsen has, you could say, wasted a tempo with this bishop. You know, the bishop has had to retreat because it was attacked by the knight. Well, Aronian has gained time. So it feels like Carlsen's opening hasn't been very successful. If he could play d4, whoops, and get a nice clamp on the centre, that might be a different story. But Aronian was alert to that possibility and played, over to you, Black to play, c5. And it's curious that over these next few moves, the game takes on the character of a Grand Prix attack. If you can picture that, e4, c5 and then f4, where Black successfully plays d5 to break up this pawn duo. And generally, strategically, that is favourable for Black because this pawn just stands there and can't really advance, and Black can use the f5 square, for example. b6, excellent move, bringing the bishop to the long diagonal to counter the bishop on g2. Now Carlsen slams the knight on the outpost. Yep, that's where it belongs. Exchange of bishops. Now normally, if we think of that Grand Prix attack position, then white's king is on g1. And very often, you know, having advanced these pawns, in fact, white's king looks rather weak on g1. It's very exposed. This time it's on the queen side. Does that make a big difference? Also, I haven't spoken about black's king. Black's king could stay there, or it could castle kingside. Let's have a look. b3 from Carlsen. Of course, this bishop needs to enter the game. Aronian decides to commit the king on this side of the board. He obviously just isn't concerned about any pawn push, and I think rightly so. Black has 4 pawns in front of the king, which looks very solid. You know, even if white did achieve f5, I mean, one could ignore that, but at the moment it's not possible anyway. So I think castles is sound. Let me just do a quick action replay on that, just so you get the castling rules here. If it's possible also to castle queenside. Oh, not like that. I think maybe you move the rook first. That's curious. Basically, if black castle queenside, I think you do this. No. You do it like that. That's right. I just couldn't work out how to do it on the graphics. Yeah, so that's legal as well. So Aronian could have done that, but it doesn't really improve his position because black's king is a bit exposed on c8. I mean, it's still okay, but he decided, I think correctly, that the king is safer on the king side. And there are good reasons for this. He played rook c8, so he wants to expose white's king. If he can break with c4, he's getting through here. And black's king looks a lot safer than white's in this position. So understandably, Carlsen decided, nope, knight f2, b5, take care. This pawn is advancing. The avalanche starts. So Carlsen decided, okay, exchange queens. Nevertheless, this is a very pleasant position for black. You know, it just reminds me of typical Sicilian, typical closed Sicilian or Grand Prix attack Sicilian, where black has just a decent position because this pawn is really going nowhere, and this is a nice break on the queen side. You know, there's pressure on the c-file. And I like these. This knight on d6 is controlling a lot of squares. Rook e1, knight d5. Yep, moving the knight over into the middle looks very nice. Exchange of bishops. King b2. Remember, Carlsen is in a must-win situation here. And at the moment, looks to me like black is better. Black has the better chances. But there's still nothing clear. I mean, I would have been tempted by c3 in this position, I have to say. And just doubling on the c-file. So the knight is tied down because it has to defend c2. Black is really solid here in any case. You know, e6, you play a6. Just sit on the position. It's very hard to see how white is going to break free. But Aronian just played rook c7. Just holding the tension. It's also very good. Very sound move. And then he doubled on the c-file. Carlsen exchanged knights. I mean, he really needs to, you know, exchange pieces, relieve some of the pressure. Again, I mean, when I was watching this, I was really surprised that he didn't play c3, that Aronian didn't play this, because I thought this was just left black with a very solid position. It's very hard to see how white is going to generate play here, but again, Levon just held the tension. Rook c1. Last chance for c3. e6. No, maybe this is the last chance for c3. I still think c3 is a good move. But king g7. And then Carlsen took on c4. Now matters aren't quite as clear. After this, exchanging a pair of rooks I think is good news for white. There's no longer any real pressure on the c-file. And now he can activate that rook. And the knight looks pretty good on e5. So Carlsen in a must-win situation, fighting back. d3. So he's looking to create a passed pawn. And there he goes, c4. Yeah, I mean Carlsen had to do this by now anyway, because if the rook defends the pawn, then knight c5 check hits this one. He needs to do this. So Aronian started checking. Remember, a draw would be very welcome for Aronian. He would win the mini match and win the final. So that's why Carlsen stepped back to c2. Exchange of pawns and knight b7. So Aronian is putting a bit of pressure here. However, if Carlsen can consolidate this position, then he's created a passed pawn on the queen side. It's incredible how Carlsen manages to sort of wriggle free. If we just go back a few moves. So we had this position. And from here, where it looks to me like black is in control, Carlsen has reached this position where he's created a passed pawn. And he's managed to hold it. So Levon started to look for counterplay. By the way, I should say that Levon had a decent time advantage here. I mean, from memory, he had something like 8 or 9 minutes, and Carlsen 2 or 3 minutes. But they were getting 15 seconds added per move. Rook b1. Yeah. Okay, if the rook can get in there, that could be very nice for white. Or indeed all the way down to b8 and go around the back somewhere. Knight b5 check. King steps to the b file. Again, Aronian just repeating moves, or would like to, and rook b7 is perhaps a possibility. So rook b3, g5. So Aronian very much wants to exchange pawns. With every pawn exchange, we get closer to a draw. Rook a3 hits that one. Rook c6 and c5. Carlsen is making progress. And that pawn can be supported. Perhaps with the knight, perhaps with a rook. That's not in danger. Knight b5 and then rook f3. The rook gets out. Now, there must have been the thought in Aronian's mind that maybe Carlsen wanted to take here and knight e4 to hit the pawn on f6. So Aronian continued with his plan of exchanging pawns and then played knight e4, hassling the rook. But after that exchange, then rook h3, hitting the pawn on h6. So this is starting to look very tricky for Aronian. You can see he's being stretched here. White's rook has fantastic flexibility. It can switch sides of the board. This passed pawn already on the 5th rank. And where's black's counterplay? This is quite nasty. You know, if, let's say, knight f5, then it'll be time to float this knight in. You know, perhaps knight c4 and knight a5. making progress. Maybe even better knight b3, just to control the d4 square. You know, this is quite serious for black. Aronian needed counterplay. He recognised that and played e5. So if rook takes h6, e takes f4, and potentially the pass pawn, well, it certainly creates counterplay. Therefore, pawn takes pawn from Carlsen. King c4. Now we see the downside of playing e5, that white's king has the potential to move into d5. But at least the rook finds some activity. Now, this is a moment in the game where Carlsen probably would have wanted 10 minutes to think about the position. Maybe you should have a think about the position. So, Carlsen needs to win this game. What would you play with white here? So, you have a think. I'll have a drink. This is quite subtle. Cheers. Carlsen played the natural move king d5. It looks absolutely correct. Attacking the e-pawn, potentially supporting the c-pawn, and leaving this knight free to come in. And who knows, if this rook can enter the position and give a check on the 7th rank, forcing black's king backwards, then black's in trouble. In fact, it's inaccurate. Knight e4 is the best move. Black is really stuck for a good move here. So, for example, king d7, now king here, rook b3. I mean, you can see if there's a check here and you know, potentially rook b6 or a knight d6, black is really struggling. Or king e6, again rook a3, swing the rook across, and knight d6 check, and something nasty happens here. Or knight e6, this is very important. After knight e6, it's possible to play rook g3, forcing an exchange of rooks. You can see the rook cannot avoid the exchange, and this knight ending is tremendous for white. The king coming into d5, the e-pawn looks like it's lost, and that knight is ready to float in, and of course the c-pawn is waiting there. So knight e4 was the move, but Carlsen played king d5. It looks so natural. But Aronian, he's so tricky. He found, in this case, a good defense. Knight e6. So one of the differences here is that if king takes pawn, the c-pawn is loose. That can be taken straight away. And otherwise, this check is a bit nasty. And, well, as we're going to see, in fact, knight c7 is the move to drive the king back. Carlsen tried rook g3. Now, this could be very strong if black gets it wrong. You know, if black is materialistic here and plays rook f6, then actually white is making fantastic progress. But knight c7 is the move. Again, exchanging is tremendous for white. I would say winning. That pawn is too weak. But the move is knight c7. So king takes pawn, but now black's rook has freedom. Rook e6. King f5. Rook f6. I mean, there's... Yeah, I mean, basically white's king can't really stay on the 5th rank. It has to go back. Rook f2. This is the point. So the rook hits the 2nd rank and hits a lot of lumps there. Rook g7, forcing the king back. Well, that's something. A check and repetition of moves. So Carlsen just gained a little time on the clock. But he still has to deal with this issue. Obviously, got to do something about the knight. Rook takes h2. So you can see that Aronian has managed to exchange lots of pawns through that little transaction. So the draw is getting closer. Nevertheless, the pawn is still quite far advanced. So c6. Very clever move now from Aronian. You could take the pawn. I mean, the computer says this is playable, but this is dangerous. You know, white's pieces are kind of massing here. But this is very cool indeed. Now, if this only checked the king forward, it would be a dreadful mistake. But Aronian has appreciated that if king e5, then you can give a check here and the king cannot advance because of rook d5 mate. There was also knight e8 check, but anyway, I prefer a checkmate. And if king d4, then knight e6 check. So basically, the king has to go backwards. There's no way through into black's position. Rook h3. Still no way through. If you play king c4, a check here, that square is mined because of knight e6. This one isn't terribly good because of rook takes d4 and again knight e6. So you can see the king has to go backwards. Once the king retreats, then black is safe. Now, don't keep checking because this would actually allow the king up the board. Now it's tricky again with the king on a7. The king is safe. And black actually has to be very careful here. But no, you keep the king trapped. And now knight e6. And knight d8 hits the pawn, so that's problematic. If knight a5, you can hit the knight. So this pawn is going to drop. c7. Knight c6 attacks the rook. Now, all you need to do is collect the pawn. Rook h5. So the rook is going to come back to d5 and then back to d7 and the c7 pawn drops. And that's the end of that basically. It'll be a draw once these pawns are exchanged. At this point the players agreed to draw and Lennart Aronian became the winner of the freestyle freestyle tournament in South Africa, picking up $200,000. Not bad. So disappointment for Carlsen, but I think he really met his match on this day. Maybe he's a little bit rusty. I mean, one had that impression, I'm talking about Carlsen here, maybe one had that impression in the tournament where he often lost a first game, and it took him time to get back into things. But I don't want to take anything away from Lennart Aronian, who showed that he really is a superb exponent of Fischer Random Chess, Chess 960. I always have to say all the names of this. One day we'll settle on one of them. Yeah, so congratulations to him. Right, well I think that just about concludes my coverage of this freestyle event. I'm still not completely convinced by it. I think it's an interesting departure, but I don't think it's going to take over the chess world. There you go, that's famous last words. Well, let me qualify that. I hope it doesn't take over the chess world, because for me, I like the tradition of traditional chess. Anyway, I'll leave that to you to discuss down below. All right, thanks for watching.